This is my friend Janelle. She's also a writer. Michelle.
Like, yeah.
Like accessibility reasons. Okay, oh, sure. But, you're like changing level. I tend to project.
Well, it's also been like.
I was a teacher. Oh, cool.
It's been a while.
All right, everybody, hello.
Hi.
Hello, welcome to Left Wing Books presents award-winning flash fiction writer Jasmine Sawers, who will discuss their collection that dazzles and cuts like shards of a broken mirror, The Anchored World, Fairy Tales and Folklore. So I'm Evan. It's great to meet you all. Thank you so much for being here in person as well as in our virtual audience. For all of you who are here in person, we appreciate you wearing your mask for the duration of the event to help us out. And then it is our continued goal to provide hybrid events to allow programming to be reachable to a wider audience. So for those of you here online, thank you so much as well. You'll be able to participate in the Q&A if you just enter your comment or questions as comments on whichever website you're watching it on, then we'd be happy to have you join us that way. So in general, I just want to talk about what we do with our events here at Left Bank. So tonight's event is only possible because of your support. So when you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into our local economy. It helps keep our bookstore open, but it also helps keep your streets paved, your libraries funded, your parks free, and all the other things that make St. Louis a better place. So thank you all so much for shopping local and shopping small and supporting this event with us. We're always hard at work planning event programming, so we encourage you to go to left-bank.com for a full list of our upcoming events for readers of all ages. Some cool ones we have coming up. November 5th, we'll be hosting a virtual event with Everina Maxwell to discuss her queer sci-fi novel, Ocean's Echo. And on November 9th, 2022, we're going to be joining with Wash U to present Allison Bechtel, award-winning cartoonist and author of Fun Home. So those are just a couple of the awesome things coming up. So for tonight's event, Jasmine Sawers is a Kundiman Fellow and Indiana University MFA alum whose work has appeared in such journals as Foglifter, The Margins, SmokeLong Quarterly, and more. The fiction has won the Ploughshares Emerging Writers Contest and the NANO Prize, and has been nominated for the Best of the Net, Best Small Fictions, and the Pushcart Prize. Sawers is proud to serve as an associate fiction editor for Fairy Tale Review. Originally from Buffalo, Sawers now teaches creative writing just outside St. Louis. Their collection of stories is called The Anchored World, Fairy Tales and Folklore. Anchored World draws inspiration from Jasmine's mixed heritage and from history, from the fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen to the ancient legends of Thailand, from the suburbs of Buffalo, New York to the endless horizons of the American Midwest. Jasmine invents a hybrid folklore for liminal characters who live between the lines and within the creases of race and language, culture and gender, sexuality and ability. It is equal parts love letter to the old tales and indictment of their shortcomings, offering a new mythology to reflect the many faces and voices of the 21st century. Karen Joy Fowler, author of Booth, says, contrary to common usage across the globe, the fairy tale world is a dangerous place to be. There is a power in Jasmine Sawers' stories in essence. They dazzle and cut like the shards of a broken mirror. Inside these pages, you'll find the beating heart of the fairy tale. So please join me in welcoming the wonderful Jasmine Sawers.
Thank you, Evan. Okay, this is okay. They're very short stories, as you might have realized. So I'm going to read, I think, several of them, and if we'll open up for questions afterward if anyone has them. Cool. All right. I'm going to start with a Snow White story. This is called Once Upon a Time in an Orchard. Every apple is poisoned here. That's misleading. I mean to say every apple in my orchard comes pre-poisoned for your convenience. A simple genetic modification and these beauties burst from the branch shining deadly as the grin of a woman. Note their size. No monstrous supermarket apples here. These fit just so into the palm of any delicate princess on the run. But don't let that fool you. There are no apples richer or fuller or more fragrant. Here, breathe deeply. That is the smell of summer when she was a child. That is catching fireflies in jars at twilight and lighting the path through the garden with them. That is getting lost in the honeysuckle and lilac and finding her way home by the spill of hydrangea. That is tiptoeing barefoot outside the first light and finding the dew cool between her toes. That is juice running down her chin. She'll close her eyes. She'll set red lips to firm flesh and hold the scent of it in her lungs for the length of 3 heartbeats. Before she breaks the skin with her teeth, she'll thank you. This one's called The Way to the Moon. This won the NANO Prize several years ago. The moon fell from the sky last Tuesday. I rolled her into the shed and gave her some water. Thank you, she said. Don't you worry about it, I said. I patted her sorest-looking crater. I got some lotion and rubbed it on. Thank you, she said. Everyone was so worried. The tides, they said. The rotation of the earth on its axis, they said. The migration of the birds, the turning of the seasons, the visibility at nighttime. Where is the moon? The end is nigh. Judgment is coming. Repent. They don't know how she breathed so shallow or how afraid she was of empty space. I just want to stay a little while, she said. I'll keep you company, I said. I rolled her out when it was raining so she could know the rain. I rolled her out when it was cloudy so she could know the gray. I rolled her out when it was sunny and she wept. I kept the moon in water and moisturizer and conversation. The earth began to suffer. I tried to keep the moon from finding out, but she knew anyway. One day she told me she could not bear it anymore. I know I've caused this chaos, she said. I have to go home. I'll keep you safe, I told her. You don't have to go anywhere. You can stay with me. You're a good boy, she said. I'll miss you. So I tied her to the end of a string. On a breezy day, I took her out and ran until the wind caught her and she soared into the sky. I ran until my thighs burned and my lungs ached. I ran until I could no longer feel the weight of the moon tugging against the line. You don't have to clap for it. This one's called Still Life with Conch. It comes from my favorite Thai legend, which is, I guess you'll find out what it's about. I gave birth to a golden conch shell, and the palace trembled. I demand a son, and you can't even give me a baby, said my husband the king. This is her karma, said the monks. She must make merit. Throw it into the ocean, and her too, said all my husband's little wives. Everyone was so busy discussing my baby, no one spared a glance for him, so smooth and full, gleaming like a secret even in the low light. He looked like a rosebud poised to burst into bloom. He bore no chips, no cracks, no dents or dips or imperfections. There was only the shine of him, the living weight. I polished the blood from his shell. Song Tong, I said, you will be a great king. With my child cradled to my breast, I could hear the wash of the tide. Though I was sentenced to death, my husband the king took pity on me, for I was first in his heart, and he had once prized me above all the wives who came after. By torchlight, he led me through the palace halls and servants' chambers, beyond the garden and the gate, until the tree cover was thick and the dawn broke pink between the branches and the call of the dukkha threatened to swallow us whole. Wordlessly, my husband the king lopped the hair from my head. He set his nose against my cheek and trembled to breathe me in. He groped beneath my sarong, where I was torn and battered, and raised his bloody hand to his face. He left me then, and never touched his son, who lay lashed to my back, patient and cool as the sea. I carried Sang Tong in a sling through my exile, through the jungle and through each village. He grew heavier, and my back bowed beneath him. I was reduced to begging for food, for shelter, for a moment's kindness. Brave, the villagers would call me, spitting. Beggar, ghost. They had forgotten the last queen as easily as they would forget the next. When at last I found a place to stay, I was no longer a woman but a crone, my feet thick with calluses, my hands gnarled, my body the dry curl of a cotton tree root. Though our home was modest, a mere listing shack, we were rich with flowers and fruit, chickens and eggs, a clean spring and shade from the sun. In our garden, I sang to Sung Tong every day. I rocked him and danced with him and told him everything he needed to know how to be a kind and just king. In the shelter of our happiness, his shell shone brighter and brighter until one day it split open and crumbled into dust to reveal a baby, golden skinned and blinking up at me. I wiped the powder from his skin and picked him up. He was warm and soft where I loved the cold and hard so well. I inspected his little fingers, which we would someday ball into fists. I studied his little toes, on which he would someday sprint away. He opened his mouth and cracked out a wail that would someday command armies. When I laid my head upon his belly, I heard the drumbeat of his victories in battle. That night, I could not sleep for the absence of the ocean in my ear.
Amazing. Haven't read that one.
I have read that one.
You read it, but
This one's called Tiny Little Goat, and I just got news that it won the reprint prize out of Fractured Lit, and that's really awesome for me. After you left, a goat took up residence in the left ventricle of my heart. I didn't know about my little stowaway at first. I thought I simply wished to say no more often and while screaming. I thought the quality of my enunciation had merely slipped the same way my housekeeping had. I thought I was finally becoming the curmudgeonly old man I had dreamt of being since I was a little girl. Freedom, I thought, is no pants and a tin can to chew on. I lost feeling in my extremities. Brown fingertips and little mushroom toes went pale purple, lavender maybe, quite nice a color if I were a flower, which I'm not. On a good day, I am a person. We care about you, some of my friends said. We know this is hard, said others. You need to get this shit looked at, said the best ones. It ain't right. That's how I ended up on my back in an MRI machine, which is a tube that contains more than its fair share of dread. Aw, the doctor said. Here he is. What? I said. Abort it. It's not a baby, said the friend who drove me. Oh my God, look at it. It's so cute. It's a tiny little goat, said the doctor. Right in your heart. That's the organ that pumps blood through your body. I know what a heart is, I said. Why is there a goat in it? Same as any parasite, the doctor said. Not exactly run-of-the-mill, but this sort of thing is not actually that uncommon. A simple surgical procedure and you'll be good as new. I was rolled out of the MRI machine and shown a picture of my goat. He'd taken a great big shit right in my inferior vena cava. He was chewing on some grass. He was wall-eyed and smiling. What happens when you take him out? I asked. You get a sticker and go home, said the doctor. That's where you live. No, I mean, what happens to him? Do you give him to a petting zoo or something? Oh my, no, said the doctor. He'll die instantly. That means right away. What happens if I don't get rid of him then? He'll die gradually, the doctor said. That means real slow, said my friend. You'll stop being able to see colors, the doctor said. Food won't taste like anything. You'll be tired all the time on account of his blocking up your blood flow. In the end, he'll just fade away. And the goat? He'll burst out of your ribcage and terrorize the town in a fit of bloodlust. Just scheduled surgery, my friend said. Everything will look better without a goat in your heart. But I went home that night and took a piss on my grandma's antique Davenport. I took off all my clothes and wandered out into the yard. I left the door open. I followed the scent of sweet clover. Thanks.
Sending 15.
Oh, okay. Let's do 3 more, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Where the moon meets the sea. Kunyai made sure I knew the truth about the moon and the sea. One late equinox, she led me barefoot across the beach, her finger thick and gnarled as a galangal root in my fist. Had I ever seen the moon so big and so close, flushed orange, low and full in the swallowing dark, like a melon waiting to fall into my arms. Kunyai swept me into her embrace and offered me up to the sky like alms to the monks. Look where the moon dips into the sea, she said, and I followed the trail of her open palm. The bottom of the moon had refracted across the ripples of water, sending tendrils of light yearning towards us. They can be together for only moments now. Why not always? I asked. Her body creaked and groaned as we sat. I pushed my legs into the cool of the sand and began to gather my foundation. Though her bones ached, Kunyai helped pack me in with long, slow sweeps of her hands. Many years ago, Kunyai said, before the trees came up and the animals blinked awake, before the world had a beating heart, moon and sea fell in love. They were not so far from each other back then. In a different life, Kunyai sorted fish from refuse to sell at market. When her arms were strong and her back unbowed, she moved through the canal with sure arcs of her paddle, shouting, mackerel, snapper, sea bass. The same practiced strokes buried me to the hip, built me into a pillar of sand. Into my palms she set each cockle shell and urchin cake and worn shard of sea glass, plucked from the shore like jewels from the catch. Sea saw in moon, stillness and light, she said. Moon saw in sea, grace and warmth. When they flowed together, the earth bloomed to life, and with it fish and flowers and people too. So too fate, so too karma. Kunyai looked up at the moon and closed her eyes as if she could warm herself by its borrowed light. I wriggled my toes, and the sand covering my feet lurched. The tide crept inexorably towards us. Father-son saw moon taste sea again and again, and he became enraged to see them so happy. Do you not know I am trying to build the world? He said. Can you not see there is no future between water and rock, tide and sky? No children, no legacy. And so father-son flung moon far, far beyond the reach of sea. And when man's ships came unceasing over the horizon, sun was pleased, assured sea would forget moon. Kunyai bent then and peered into me. Though she had turned from the lovers, I could see them reflected in her eyes. Had we not already created life, she said. Had the world not blossomed around us like the lushest of gardens? If I replied, I cannot recall it now. Kunyai packed more sand on my legs and stood. She shed her sarong and her t-shirt and bared herself to the night. She waded into the water, and soon she was but a speck of copper floating on her back in the wash of light where moon met sea. This is probably the longest one. It's called Domestic Curses for All Occasions.
Do you want to take a drink first?
Yes. Did you lock the door? Did you turn the oven off? Picture this. A careless man, someone who has tossed out your heart like so much chaff, is beset by a creeping worry. I'm sorry, I have to check my house, he'll say 10 minutes into a date. I think something's wrong, he'll tell his boss in the middle of a meeting. He's back and forth between his home and his life, and that home swallows him whole. Not dazzling enough for you? Look, you can't go big with a curse. Rather, you can't discount the impact of going small. We're not giving people pestilent boils or snatching up firstborns here, man. Don't be fucking crass. Go to the mall if you want that kind of thing. You came to me because I'm an artist. This isn't Die Hard 9. This is Dreams, and I'm Kurosawa. You won't be able to escape the clutter. Say you've got yourself a collector. What does she love? Books and journals and calligraphy pens. She can't walk through her wealth of them. Computers and tablets and cameras. They cascade in her wake, and they'd shatter but for the cushion of detritus on the floor. Shoes and clothes and handbags? She's trapped, suffocating beneath the mountain of all she has, strictly metaphysically. There's a draft, but where from? It shivers down the walls and whistles through her skin. It's an old house, she'll say, or my father, bless him, did the insulation. She'll hunt for it, casually at first, but her urgency increases with time. She'll not eat, she'll not sleep. All her furniture, all her books, all her pots and pans and plates and glasses. She'll gather them in the center of each room so she can best monitor the windows, the doors, the cabinets for mouse holes and pinholes and daylight through the rafters. Her eyes become razors. Her fingers become talons. Your dog will find you tedious. This is for someone who has never loved a lover more than he loved his dog. He breaks up with anyone who sneezes at dog hair on the furniture. He reheats pasta from a can so he can afford for the dog to eat raw gourmet. He's moved across the country and back with her head in his lap all the while. He can't sleep unless he can hear her snoring beside him. He tells her all his secrets. You're the only one who loves me, Butternut. There must be something essentially wrong deep inside me, Butternut. I'm a monster, Butternut. One day, she heaves a great sigh and turns away. You will lose the words, thank you. Perhaps you know a busy mom. She's booked from the first shock of the alarm at 6 until her kids tumble out of the minivan after the game, the cello lessons, the extra math tutoring. The first time she chokes, it's in front of the barista at her favorite coffee joint. Then it's her own mother dropping off this week's casserole, her niece babysitting on a Saturday night, and then her neighbor rescuing her trash cans from where they were blown into the street. The school counselor who calls with an opportunity for her eldest, and then her husband who tells her to relax while he goes to the parent-teacher meeting. Her tongue is parched and the words become dust she coughs up. Everyone she loves turns to stone before her. You will think of me every day. I don't think this one's for you. This is for the discerning client more interested in results than theatrics. This is for someone who need not see to know. Because a good curse, a real curse, begins in love. People don't come to me because they have an annoying coworker or a neighbor who has loud parties. The price is too high for that. You come to me because love has caught you in tatters. You show up here and you say, my ex-wife is vain and I distort all her mirrors. Oh, my boyfriend watches TV while I clean up after him and the kids all my days, and I turn him into an obsessive tormented by stray flecks of dirt. Dear me, my mother doesn't know how to love, and I give her a mother's heart with no one to exercise it on. But no one ever asks me, Arda, how did you get here? There was a girl, and I loved her more than she loved me. She loved herself so well that there was nothing left for anyone else. For her, I split myself open. I carved myself inside out. I lobbed my only wish out into the ether, oblivious to anything listening. I hope you think of me every day. I have heard she's thrice divorced. I have heard her children do not visit her at home. I have answered the phone only to hear her breath come heavy down the line before she hangs up. I have sat alone in the light of the waning moon, sipping up my success. Anyway, tell me, who is it that's worth your heart? And this is the last one I'll do. This was second place in 2020's SmokeLong Quarterly contest, or 2021's, I can't remember. And it is appearing next year in the Norton Anthology American Flash Fiction Anthology. And if you can bear it, it is one long, breathless sentence, and I'm going to take one more drink. All your fragile history. I got this DNA test for my dog because he looks like a cloud, and he looks like a luck dragon, and he looks like something your lint roller picked up when you banged it around on the couch for the first time in 3 years. And I was sick of people asking, sick of having no answer when they did, so I followed all the directions on the packet. I got him first thing in the morning before he could take a sip of water, before he could go lick the other dog's eyeball, before he could root around the other dog's asshole with his tender pink snoot snoot. I got him, and I swabbed his gums while he jerked to and fro like a malfunctioning Furby, and I stuck the Q-tip in the test tube, and I sent it back to New Jersey, postage paid, no problem. And I sat back to wait the appropriate amount of time for some lab coats to put his elementals in a centrifuge and spin them around until they could draw out all the threads of him and look at his heritage as if it were a map, as if they could build him his own family tree, as if they could slot him into some ongoing canine narrative and say, his people left France in 1647 and roved across the English countryside before boarding a ship to Mexico. It all makes sense now, how he makes that weirdo monkey sound, how he howls and shakes when he's excited, how he shrieks when you approach the door to leave him. And anyway, it took me 2 weeks exactly, and I woke up to an email telling me he was not half cumulus, half cryptid, but half rat terrier, a quarter miniature poodle, a quarter chihuahua, and I looked at him and I said, Huckleberry Finn, you have never caught a rat in your life. And he looked at me and didn't say anything. I assumed because he was ashamed of his failures as a vermin exterminator, and I assumed because he wanted to make a point about my hypocrisy walking around with this face and not getting a DNA test myself. But let me tell you, white people love to take DNA tests. White people love to parcel out what kind of white they are. White people love discovering less than 1% sub-Saharan African or 3% Native American on their rainbow pie graph summaries. White people love to tell other white people that they come in different shades and they can portion out all their blood in riveting fractions, but when they ask me what I am and it's the day I happen to answer, it's always Thailand. I hope you get liberated from China soon. Or, no, you're Indian, don't lie. Or, I'm so jealous you never have to go tanning. And wouldn't you know it's worse when I tell them I too am cobbled together of fractions. I too am white enough to want to spit into a beaker to find out if I'm 1/4 Irish or 2/5 French. Wouldn't you know it's worse when they say, oh, you do look white. You're actually really pretty. Or you're so dark for only being half. Or are you sure you're not Indian? Wouldn't you know it's worse to fear you will be unmoored should you spit into that beaker only for a stranger to be spat back shouting Italian, Indonesian, Greek, Vietnamese, Swedish, waving a flag you don't recognize, singing a language your tongue can't curve around, loosing the tether to all your fragile history as if a single PDF has the power to cleave you from the memory of the burst of mangosteen across your tongue, the touch of your grandma's hand as she helped you whisk the German chocolate cake batter, the way Thai and English merge in your mouth to crack out interlingual puns, the way your mother decorated the Christmas tree with garlands of jasmine blossoms and a slender Buddha up top, the way your eyes glint green in a certain light, the way your grandma said Davenport and saved used Ziploc bags, the way your grandpa said, I just want to help someone, and let you hammer nails into blocks in his wood shop, the way you slipped between buildings and under scaffolding to find a bustling halal restaurant cooking cow milk in a wok the size of a bathtub, the way the street vendor in Bangkok asked your mother, is that child half white, only to jack up the price when the answer was yes, the way your brother hid his birth name from the kids at school because if they knew it, they would run around chanting ching chong, the way you've been called an N-word and a chink and a gook and a slent and a stick, the way you've been called the perfect Asian student, the way you've been told to go home, the way you used to scrub your skin until you were one big livid pink abrasion, hoping the color would rub off with the blood, the way you look for evidence of belonging, the way you look in the mirror, the way you look. Thank you. I think I'll call it a day on reading, but if anyone has questions, I would love to take some. You might know, Crystal.
How did you find the Flash forum?
How did I find the Flash forum? When I was in my MFA, my second year, a new MFA professor arrived named Jacinda Townsend, and she appears to only write novels, but she wanted to do a flash fiction class. And So she did, and it was my only opportunity to work with her because of the way our fiction workshop schedules work. Excuse me. And what it did was allow me to work outside strict realism, strictly because in such small space, you have to do some fancy footwork to get a full arc in, because, Flash can be the depiction of a moment or it can be the depiction of a lifetime. And I went to a fairly traditional MFA. Luckily, it was fairly diverse in terms of the races of faculty and students. But, most of the time what they wanted was a 20-page story, and if it's not realism, there better be a damn good reason, right? But that's not really what I write, but it can be a voice in your head. It's still a voice in my head, that like, be serious, write something for real. But entering Jasmine's class made me see that, I could go really short and I could still make a full story, and that I need not do that in the realist vein. Kate and then Meredith.
Is writing in like long form something that you think, maybe you would do if you had the right story at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's happened since I've started to publish a lot of flash fiction is that people then think I'm only a flash fiction writer, and that's just not true. I have lots of regular sized short stories, and I periodically pick up my novel draft and dust it off and look at it and say, oh, this is good, someone should finish it. And so like maybe someone someday will. The time has not come yet. Are there any, Meredith?
Well, first, this was incredible to hear your work, and I really love the worlds that you create in your stories. They're just like so beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really an incredible experience to hear you read. And was curious about, I forgot the name of the story, but the story about the goat and the heart, and if you could share a little bit more about the sort of inspiration for that story. Is there source material that it is inspired from, or?
No, I've never told this to anyone before. But to go back a little further, when I first started writing the stories to this, we're talking about 10 years ago, and first starting to get into Flash, I was like, what do I love about stories? I love fairy tales. Reading fairy tales when I was young really, I think, or having them read to me rather, really inspired my entire path to storytelling and to writing in general. But, once again, you get to that thing of like, be serious. Don't write fairy tales. So when I was first writing these stories, I was sort of only looking at the stories that I had grown up with, and that really actually precluded the Thai stories. I had to go looking for Thai stories. I did have a book when I was younger, and that's where the Conch story came from. But if you get the book, there'll be information about that in the author's note. Like, the book wasn't very good. It wasn't written by a Thai person. It was collected by a white person who was like, I'm surely the right person to disseminate this into the world. But anyway, as time went on, I was like, I could make my own fairy tales. Fairy tales are like a blueprint, and they, like any genre, they have their sort of rules and their logics. So I was like, if I'm really going to do a collection, it can't all just be Hans Christian Andersen and Charles Perrault and Brothers Grimm, right? How boring is that? So I started to write my own. I was writing fanfic. And the character I was writing in the fanfic was a sort of a motor mouth, and also sort of like quick-witted, but also he talks a lot so that people can't see that he has like a heart, right? And he was saying something, I can't remember, he was saying something like, that gets my goat, that gets the little goat in my heart. And I was like, okay, what if, and cast aside that character, cast aside any fan fiction, what about a goat in a heart? So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, very important follow-up question. What was the fanfic? You can tell me later if you don't want to.
It was Tony Stark.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, yes. Fully support that, yes.
We've got a really hard-hitting one from the online audience. It is, why are you so wonderful?
Is that your mom?
My mom doesn't use the internet, so I don't have an answer for that. I think someone else will have to answer for them. And I feel like there are various suspects I have for that question, and if so, she knows the answer. Are there any other questions?
I have a half-baked question because I'm new to Flash as a format. And I am thinking about, as I've been listening to the pieces that you chose to read, like the energy of like pushing that I am just like just picking up on, like pushing against margins or definitions and like pushing like like figures, like pushing or pulling. And I wonder, it's like a half-baked question, like I said, but if the format of like the brevity of Flash does anything for you in terms of like that, like the ability to create an energy against like forces or margins.
Yes, absolutely. Let me get another drink.
Yeah.
So as you might imagine, writing Flash, especially when you're first starting out, is super not easy. I've seen, I've been on staff with a few literary journals over the past, 14, 12 years, I don't even remember. And a lot of times people think that like, okay, I'm gonna write a 500-word story. So they write, and then they hit 500 words and they're like, I'm done. But that's not a story, right? Or they think an anecdote is the same thing as a story. For me, Flash, because it's so short, you have to make sure every word is carrying not only its own weight, but the weight of the silences, the spaces in between the lines. Everything has to do work. Every sentence, every word has to matter. If you can take out the word and make the story and make the sentence stronger, you make the story stronger. And the word doesn't actually have to be there. But also, I think rhythm matters and mellifluousness matters. And you have to think about times like this when you're going to be reading aloud, and it has to be able to come off your tongue easy, right? It can't be clunky. It has to sound nice to the ear. So that's a tall order. And for me, that means being as concise as possible, distilling things to like the absolute bone. You're carving away flesh, you're carving away anything that is unnecessary. It's about being concise, and when you're as concise as possible, an impact can be that much more intense. And so it also means like you're using verbs that are more active and stuff like that, but you also can't be too florid because you get into a different situation with that. But something that I've been finding useful craft-wise is to try to approach all the writing I do the same way I do Flash, which is to say, you know, there shouldn't be a bunch of extra. The extra, all that padding and stuff, if it isn't serving your story, it is dragging it down. And I don't know if you have this book here, I'm sure you do, it's wonderful. It's called The Department of Speculation by Jenny Offal. That's Offill. I think I'm gonna spell it wrong. And I'd heard people call it a novel in Flash, and I was like, that's silly. How could you possibly write a novel in Flash? These things are mutually exclusive concepts, preposterous. And then I read it. And I was like, oh, so it's a novel in Flash. And, but what it was Flash in sensibility, not necessarily in form. So it started to get percolating in my brain that actually your writing is only stronger when you approach it with the intent that every single word matters. So I've started to view Flash not as a form or genre, but as a practice.
Got one more audience one. You talked about adhering to the rules of the fairy tale form. How are some ways that you are trying to work against and break those rules?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So I think one of the things that draws me to fairy tales is that they're so interesting because our modern understanding of fairy tales is, oh, these are stories for children. Meanwhile, we've got really crazy shit happening in them, like grandmother gets swallowed by a wolf, and then Huntsman takes his knife and slits the wolf up his belly and frees grandma. Like what are you doing? And then they're like, you know, little Tommy, who's 3 years old, will definitely like this one. But the thing is, he does, right? Kids are sort of like interestingly bloodthirsty in the same way that fairy tales are. And we expect the children not only to like them, but to understand the stories, the lessons in them. You know, Red Riding Hood, don't talk to strangers, right? But a lot of fairy tales have these sort of insidious insights into our culture. Fairy tales show us that our culture has things like beauty privilege, like the beautiful are good and moral. And if you're ugly or if you're fat or whatever else, you are not only bad, you are unworthy of love. You know, think of the Cinderella versus her ugly stepsisters, stuff like that. And that kind of thing rolls through all fairy tales. In the Thai fairy tales, I got a better book more recently, and it's written by a Thai person. And they seem to be pretty faithful to whatever the original stories are. And of course, all fairy tales and folklore and stuff, well, other than Hans Christian Andersen, but most fairy tales and folklore are oral tales, and they can't be attributed to one person, right? But in the Thai ones, they're really like, oh, the Khmer, aren't they ugly and evil? Or like, the Vietnamese, they're back. Those Lao are ridiculous. You know, they're very like nationalistic and, you know, we're better than you. And that stuff appears in the Western fairy tales as well. And so for me, what was really interesting was to look at those cultural messages that actually we carry around every day. And when we talk about being anti-racist, when we talk about being feminist and, you know, trying to work against queerphobia and transphobia and ableism, what you can see is that these stories have lots of those kinds of bigotries woven into them, and we are carrying that around. And so one of the things that I was looking at when I was trying to cast about for ideas or what next to write was what shitty cultural lesson can I push up against, right? And so yeah, I think that definitely appears throughout this book. Is just my attempt to say, hey, some of this messaging was bad, and can we challenge that? Thank you. Thanks. Graham?
I love that you're like extending fairy tales in a way, critiquing them, like what you're just talking about. But I also love that you love fairy tales. It seems like so. So I was wondering, are there fairy tales that you don't really want to mess with, or that you don't? You're like, oh, I don't think I want to touch that one. Just out of curiosity.
I don't know if there are ones where I'm like questioning my own right to do it. I wouldn't, for example, take like an Indian fairy tale, because like I don't have the cultural understanding of that, and it's not mine to do it with, right? But in terms of ones that I do think are fair game to me, I think the ones that I don't want to do are actually ones that I just find boring. I find Red Riding Hood really boring. I just do. I think it's been done to death. Yeah. When Evan introduced me, I do read for Fairy Tale Review. And of course I read a lot of Fairy Tale Review stuff, and you get so many more pieces than you can publish. You know, we essentially take less than 1% of our fiction submissions. But there are like 3 stories or kinds of stories that I find you're gonna really, really, really have to do something awesome with it to get me to say yes. Red Riding Hood is one of them. And this is gonna be, this is just me talking. It's not the whole staff of Fairy Tale Review. Everyone's gonna have a different opinion on which fairy tale they're sick of. But for me personally, I will tell you. I'm sick of Red Riding Hood. I am sick of mermaid stories. They tend not to be specifically The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen stories, which I find to be an extremely trans story. And I've written a trans story about it, but it's like a lot longer than could fit in this. But mermaid stories in general, there are mermaid stories from across the world. There are lots of mermaid stories, right? And I find a lot of them just to be unimaginative. Like you haven't thought of the possibilities beyond the really obvious yet. And the third one that I'm sort of going to be a hard sell on is the Selkie myths from Ireland and Scotland. Not because I don't like them. Again, like I like whatever, but it's just a matter of people not doing anything new with them. Ben, did you have a question?
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to share when your next class that you're teaching?
I don't think I have one.
Oh, you don't have one? No, nothing scheduled?
No, what I do have is something that probably no one in this room is going to go to, but I'm going to my alma mater, Indiana University in Bloomington on December 1st. I will be sitting in on Summer Upadhyay's undergraduate advanced fiction class in the morning, and then in the evening I'll be doing a reading like this and a publishing talk for the current MFAs there.
Awesome. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Are there any other questions? If not, we can get to any signings or personal conversations that you want to have.
Okay,
right, thank you so much. So yes, we'll go ahead and move on to signing and whatever mingling that we would like to do. For those of you online, it's also not too late to get a book order in if you order on our website. If you would like it to be personalized, just make a note for that in the comments. For everybody here, we have Anchored World for sale at the desk. Run over there if you haven't gotten it yet. If you've already gotten it, get a second one, and then we'll get to the second one. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
That was Laura.